Today you will solve 4 JavaScript challenges to master functions. First, I will show you the problem's description and examples, then try solving it on your own, and then we will solve it together. In the first challenge, you need to write a function that has one parameter message. And then this function should display the message in the console with the question mark in the end. And here are some examples. So this is the name of the function. And then you have the data, how are you? So this is the data that we send and that will be stored in the parameter message. Then we have this arrow that means that the function display question should return something. And it should return a string, how are you? So this is the same message, but in the end, we have an additional question mark. For example, if I send the data, how are you with question mark, this function should return, how are you with 2 question marks. Try solving it on your own. I start from the keyword function. Then I write the name of the function. In our case, this is display question. Then I put parentheses and curly braces. Now I see that we have one parameter message, so let's add this parameter. And now let's solve this challenge step by step. On the first line, I should create a new message. For example, I can call this variable question. And this variable equals to message plus question mark. And our second step is to return this variable. So I see that I have a typo in our variable question. And now we don't have any mistakes. Let's call this function and look to the console. I invoked the function display question and I sent the data how are you? And when I log it to the console, I see how are you with the question mark. Let's try it with other examples. And now I see that our function works correctly because we have the same answers as in our examples. We also have the short solution for this challenge, and it would be return message plus question mark. It is also a valid solution, but in the beginning, I really recommend you to separate each task to a single line. It will help you to debug your code, and it will be easier to understand what happens in your code when you open this project after some period of time. In the second challenge, you need to write a function that has 2 parameters, hours and pay per hour. And your function should calculate how much money a person gets per hours. So for example, if you work 1 hour, and if your pay is $1 per hour, your total earnings equal to 1. And if you work 10 hours and you get $10 per hour, your total earnings equal to 100. How to calculate the total earnings? Try solving it on your own. Some explanations how to solve this challenge. If you look at these 2 numbers and the result, you can find the mathematical operation that you can use to solve this challenge. So you can multiply both numbers and then you will get the total earnings. And it will also work in our last example because as you see, we worked 0 hours and no matter how much money we get per hour, the total income will be 0. Let's just multiply 2 numbers to find the total income. I write the function calculate earnings and I have 2 parameters. Let's add both these parameters to the function. And as in the previous challenge, let's solve it step by step. Our first step would be to calculate the total earnings. And we also should return our total earnings. So on the second line, let's return total earnings. Now I called this function again and I used the first input from our examples, and as you see, we have the right answer. Let's do the same with the remaining examples. And now as you see in the console, we have exactly the same answers as we had in our examples. So it means that we successfully solved this challenge. In the third challenge, we use arrays. An array is a compound data type, and I have several videos on this topic. In this challenge, you have the array plans, and your function has one parameter plan. The function should add a given plan to both ends to the beginning and to the end of the plans array. And I have a line with attention that this function doesn't return anything. So if you look at our examples, we have the initial array plans with the string code inside, and then we invoke our function addPlan to both ends, and here we use it as the data for the parameter plan, and then if I log plans to the console, I see a new array where the first element equal to it, then we have code, and then we have it. The same in the second example. We have two actions, sleep and work, and when I add a new action, read, now I have four actions in my plans: read, sleep, work, and read. This is your initial code, and as always, try solving it on your own, but right now let's solve it together. So first thing that I need to add is a parameter plan. Then an array has two methods: to add the element in the beginning of the array and to add the element to the end of the array. Unshift method inserts new elements to the start of an array. This is exactly what we need, and here I can put plan as element that I want to add to the array. And we also have the method push that appends new element to the end of an array. So I need to add the same plan to the end of the array. If you forget the exact name of these methods, you always can write the name of an array. In our case, this is plans. And then you can put dot, and you will see the list of all methods that this function has. And then you can write a method's name. And if you hover over it, you will see the short description of what this method does. On this time, our plans equal to array that contains code, as in our first example. Then we have the function addPlan to both ends. I log to the console plans, so as in our example. But as you see, we don't have any changes. And this is because if we want to execute our function, we need to call it. So I add this additional line, addPlan to both ends, that contains the string it. And now you see that in the console we have the array, and if I expand it, you see that it contains it, code, and it. Let's also try the second example. Now I changed our plans to sleep and work, and when I call our function, I provide the word read, and as you see, we have the array with read, sleep, work, and read. So it means that our function works correctly. And finally, you will solve a complex challenge. On this time, your function will have two parameters: numbers, which is an array, and a number. And your function should return true if a given array, numbers, contains a number that is greater than a given number, and otherwise it should return false. For example, you have two inputs. The first input is always an array. In this case, it contains the number 2. And then you have the second input that is always equal to one number. And this function returns true because we see that 2 is more than 1. In our second example, we have 1 which is not greater than 2, so we return false. Then we have more complicated example where array contains multiple numbers. And in this case, we need to find if any number from this array is greater than our second input. And we see that yes, in this function we have the number 2 which is greater than 1, so we return true. Then you have almost the same example, but your second input is equal to 2, and it returns false because 2 is not greater than 2, it is equal to 2. We need to return true only if any number from this array is greater than our second input. And finally, we have an empty array, so it doesn't contain any numbers, and this is the reason why we return false. Try solving it on your own. Try to recall different techniques that you know in JavaScript to solve this code challenge. You also can use a paper where you write down the step-by-step instruction of what this function should do to give the desired output. You need to understand that the computer can do only one step per tick. When we create an algorithm, which is the step-by-step instruction for our computer, we need to solve it step by step. So first of all, we have the array that contains 3 numbers, but we need to compare each number to our second input to determine if there is any number that is greater than our second input. Our first step would be to take this first number and our numbers equal to 1. And then we compare 2 numbers. So we take 1 from our numbers and we compare it to the number from our second input. When we compare, we ask the question if this first number is greater than the second. If not, we go to the next number. So we forget about our previous number. Now our numbers equal to 0 and we compare if this number is greater than 1. We know that this number is not greater, so we move to the next number. And now we have the last number in our array and we compare if this number is greater than our second number. And yes, this is greater, so this is the reason why we should return true. Do we have some tools in JavaScript that can go step by step through the entire array? We can write a for loop that will go through each element from this array and that will compare both numbers together to find if there is any number that is greater than our second number. When we compare two numbers, we also need to store this result somewhere. So we can create a new variable, for example, response, that is equal to false by default. I write R for the variable response, and if I find the case where the number is greater than the second number, I have to reassign my response to true. Now let's write some code. As always, I started from our function and then I have 2 parameters. So I need to write both these parameters. Then we declare a for loop to go through each element from our array. In the first part, I declare I for index. Then I write the condition while I is less than numbers.length. And then I need to increase I. In this case, when you write numbers.length, you will not see any clues from Visual Studio Code because our function doesn't know that numbers is an array. Then I need to create a variable with the number from this array. I can't write number because we already have number as the name of our parameter. I will write the long name number from array. And this is equal to numbers with the index of I. As you remember, when I use square brackets, I can get access to a specific number by index. And then I need to compare both numbers. If my number from array is greater than number, in this case, I reassign my variable response to true. But now we don't have any variable that calls response, so let's declare it before the for loop. On this time, I use a keyword let because we reassign this variable in the future. And that's it for our for loop, so we don't need to write any else statement like else response equal to false because our response equal to false by default. And if number from array is not greater than number, we just want to skip this number and go to the next one. And then when we finish our for loop, we need to return our response. And now I logged this function to the console and we see that for the first example, we have the right answer. So let's do it with other examples. And now as you see, we have exactly the same answers as in our examples. So we successfully solved our final code challenge. I hope that you learned something new from these challenges, and in the next video we start to create a new game project where we will use all JavaScript techniques that we learned.